Andrew Giles talking about an individual who was released from immigration detention, subsequently charged with murder in Brisbane. Let's go live to the Nationals leader in the Senate, Bridget McKenzie. We'll get to Andrew Giles' comments eventually after getting through some of the local issues there in Bendigo. When we do, we'll get your thoughts on it, Bridget McKenzie. But before that, tell me what's your read on this, the latest debacle around immigration detention?
Oh, well, it's just we're reeling from one debacle to another, Kieran, and I think Dutt's over in the conference he was holding in WA handled it spectacularly. On every single measure, the Anthony Albanese government is getting the calls wrong. You would not want Albo backing you up in a pub fight. He's a gutless wonder, whether it's standing up in the International Criminal Court for our allies this week, or whether it is simply having frameworks within our immigration system that mean we are safe and secure here at home. We've seen boat arrivals, we've seen detainees released when they shouldn't have been, they're not being tracked, and now changing the character test that the ATT actually warned was going to be an issue has again resulted in Australians being subjected to violence, and it's unacceptable, and they have to take responsibility. I mean, I'm amazed that Andrew Giles has finally been found. The minister that's been in hiding for weeks has popped up in Bendigo. So I hope he does get asked the tough questions, because part of the great responsibility and privilege of being a Minister of the Crown is the buck does stop with you. And you do need to front up and be accountable to the Australian people.
Well, I just want to play you now. We've queued it up at the right spot where we meant to have it from the get-go. I want to play it for you and get your reaction to what Andrew Giles said.
Of course, yep.
The family of a man allegedly murdered by a former immigration detainee says the system failed to protect the community. Why didn't you overrule the AAT and keep Emmanuel Saki in detention?
Yeah, thanks very much. Obviously, my thoughts, and I'm sure all our thoughts, are with the family of the victim, and I should be very clear in articulating, as I did in respect of the criminal matters that are involved here, that I don't want to say anything that might interfere with those criminal processes. What I can say is that over 5 years, successive governments sought to maintain the cancellation of this individual's visa. The AAT made a decision to overturn it, and they did so notwithstanding the directions which put a very high priority on community safety, and indeed which recognise the abhorrence of the Australian community for domestic violence. That was a decision of the AAT. I have sought urgent advice from my department about the implications of this.
What are you seeking to learn that you shouldn't already know?
Well, I think it's always important to look at these circumstances, to look at the process issues, and obviously to give careful consideration to the decision. Any other questions?
Saki has been convicted of more than 40 offences across 4 states and territories. Haven't you failed to keep the community safe by not intervening?
Well, we very strongly argued against his visa, which was cancelled, being revoked. We argued very strongly for the grounds of community safety, which are at the highest priority of the ministerial direction and of our consideration of all of these matters. That was what we put to the Administrative Appeals Tribunal. The Tribunal made a different decision.
Given the bashing of her grandmother, Nanette Simmons, and now this alleged murder, why should you keep her job?
Well, I'm determined to keep working hard in response to, firstly, the matters that relate to the High Court's decision last year, to ensure that we continue to put in place all of those mechanisms, strong laws and very significant resourcing, $250 million, to ensure that our trusted law enforcement officials can do their job to keep the community safe. That is my focus, and it will continue to be my focus.
Minister, one more question from me. When's your preventative detention regime going to be activated?
The regime has been activated. We have a number of applications well underway. I think I've previously advised at a relatively recent press conference that a number of applications have moved from the first stage, which involves the government considering all of the material, tens of thousands of pages of documents, and then seeking the advice of an expert, which is required as the second stage in this process. So there are a number of applications at that stage. I remind your viewers, your listeners, your readers that this is an approach that's modelled on the Coalition's high-risk terror offender scheme, under which the first application took 3 years. We are working as fast as we can to ensure that good applications are put forward, and a number are well underway.
Minister, if the AAT's decision was wrong in this particular case, are there any other cases that you're going to be more proactively looking at the decision that was made and maybe intervening so that there's not another disaster before we have this conversation?
We're looking very carefully at all of the matters that come before the AAT to ensure that the integrity of our migration system and community safety is given the highest priority, which it has to have. Thanks very much, everyone.
There you go. The Immigration Minister, Andrew Giles, at that news conference in Bendigo. Bridget McKenzie is with us, and he says that their argument to the Administrative Appeals Tribunal was to keep that person in detention. They didn't follow the government's recommendation on that.
Well, at the end of the day, Kieran, what I hear from this minister time and time again is that he's working hard. He's working really hard. And still, decisions are being made to change frameworks, to not submit applications against bail, to not use the ministerial discretionary powers that he does have available to him to ensure that Australians are kept safe. It's all good and well to say you've received advice or you've spoken to this person or that person or the states are giving you this information or not. But at the end of the day, as I keep saying, this is a Westminster democracy and the buck stops with the minister. He has the discretionary power to make changes. He's not doing the appropriate thing. This is a guy who has spent his entire adult life, advocating for weaker border protection laws. This is a guy that is on the left of the Labor Party and who at some very base level within his heart wanted to be more permissive about border security, thinking he was probably doing a good thing for those seeking to enter this country. The reality is we have to have tough borders, not because we're cruel people, but to protect our own citizenry, and that's your number one job. So I don't think he's been exercising his discretionary responsibilities appropriately at all, and there is a raft of examples right across his portfolio where he's been reckless and indiscriminate, and I would suggest turned a blind eye to actually being quite more muscular to protect Australians. And I would like him to see, not say he's working hard, I'd actually like him to see him making decisions that are hard.
The Cabinet Minister, Ed Husic, has today been asked about the Coalition, Peter Dutton's comments about being open to withdrawing our membership of the International Criminal Court. He says he's staggered by this. He finds it staggering, the position the Coalition's taking. He says the Coalition talks big about law and order, but then wants to pick what law and order it'll follow. It's staggering that you can have a mainstream political party determine on the basis of something that is uncomfortable to them, that they would then just turn their back on a court of law. What do you say to him?
Well, Ed Husic and his government under Anthony Albanese have turned their back on our international allies, on a liberal democracy, a very proud liberal democracy, and a friend of Australia in Israel in the Middle East at its very darkest hour. That's who this government has turned their back on. And Ed Husic, let's be really blunt about it, is one of 4 senior cabinet ministers that are more worried about holding their seat against the Greens in Western Sydney than they are for doing the right thing and standing up for Israel on the global stage, and indeed protecting Jewish Australians from anti-Semitism, which is now rife, particularly in our capital cities. So I hear Ed, but that to me is a man that's more worried about holding his seat against a Greens incursion and having pro-Palestine views and Hamas views rather than standing up for what's right.
Bridget McKenzie, thanks, and thanks for your patience through a couple of news conferences. We'll talk to you next week.